So, let's talk about the Caroline Age, that slice of English history from 1625 to 1649. Now, you might think of elegant poetry and lavish theater, and you wouldn't be wrong. But this period was so much more than that. It was, in fact, a full-blown cultural battleground, where every single verse, every line in a play was caught in the crossfire of a kingdom that was literally tearing itself apart.
Okay, so to get this, you have to picture the court of King Charles I. I mean, just imagine it, a world of incredible art, classical beauty, and this refined aristocratic elegance. It was a court that really saw itself as this perfect island of culture and order. But here's the thing, just outside the palace walls, a massive storm of political and religious anger was brewing, and it was getting ready to bring that whole glittering structure crashing right down.
And this timeline, wow, it really sets the stakes, doesn't it? The entire era of Caroline literature happens under the shadow of this countdown. From the moment Charles takes the throne in 1625 to his execution in 1649, every poem, every play is written against this backdrop of crisis. You can feel it escalating, from tension to all-out war and finally to revolution.
So, to really get the literature, we first have to understand the deep, fundamental cracks that were running through the entire country. King Charles I's way of ruling was a huge departure from his father, James I, and that shift, that's what cracked the kingdom's foundation right open.
This table here lays it out so clearly. It's basically the roadmap to war. See, where King James would at least negotiate and try to keep a fragile religious peace, his son Charles just imposed his absolute will. No discussion. He actually shut down Parliament for 11 years. They called it the personal rule. And with his Archbishop William Laud, he forced these rigid high church rituals on everyone, which a lot of people thought felt dangerously close to Catholicism. And the kingdom went from being tense to being broken beyond repair. And this massive national divide wasn't just being debated in secret pamphlets or in Parliament, it was being fought out in verse. The whole literary world basically split into two camps, and each one mirrored a side in this growing conflict. You had the metaphysical poets, and you had the cavalier poets. First up, let's talk about the metaphysicals. Think of guys like George Herbert. In a lot of ways, they were carrying the torch from the previous era, building on the work of poets like John Donne. Their stuff was super intellectual, spiritually anxious. They were wrestling with the big, messy questions of faith, doubt, and what it all means. Reading their poetry is like a workout for your brain and your soul. They use these wild, extended metaphors called conceits, like comparing a soul to a globe or love to a compass, forcing you to really think about God, sin, and death. It was deep, it was complex, and honestly, it was the perfect kind of poetry for an age filled with so much uncertainty. But then, a totally new style pops up, coming straight from the heart of the royalist court. These were the Cavalier poets, writers like Robert Herrick and Richard Lovelace. They were the cool new voice. Their poetry, it was witty, it was elegant, and it was fiercely, unapologetically loyal to King Charles. This was the official soundtrack for the royalist cause. And this just spells out the divide perfectly. On one side, you've got poets looking inward, exploring the soul's journey with God. On the other side, you have poets looking outward, celebrating court life, love, beauty, and honor. I mean, these aren't just different poetic styles. These are two completely opposite ways of seeing the world, clashing right here on the page. Okay, so this brings us to the core philosophy of those Cavalier poets. And it's a phrase you have definitely heard before, but during the Caroline Age, believe me, it took on a whole new layer of meaning. Right at the heart of all this Cavalier poetry was carpe diem, seize the day. Simple enough, right? But this wasn't just about living in the moment. In a time of such deep anxiety, with war looming on the horizon, what did it really mean to seize the day? Well, it was a political statement, totally. Think about it. In the face of this growing Puritan movement that condemned worldly pleasures, celebrating beauty, love, and just having a good time was an act of cultural rebellion. Seizing the day became a way of defiantly shouting your support for the aristocratic, royalist way of life that was being threatened. So when Robert Herrick wrote these incredibly famous lines, he wasn't just giving us a lovely thought about youth fading away. No way. He was capturing the mood of his entire social class. This is the sound of a world celebrating with this desperate, beautiful urgency, precisely because they all knew that world was about to be ripped apart by war. And this conflict wasn't just contained in books of poetry. It took center stage, literally, in the most exclusive, the most extravagant, and the most politically loaded art form of the entire era. See, as the nation got more and more divided, the theater world started to change. Those big, public playhouses from Shakespeare's time, the ones that catered to everybody, they started to decline. Instead, the court turned inward, pouring a ton of money into creating this ridiculously lavish, private form of entertainment for a very, very exclusive audience. And that was the court mosque. It was this incredible multimedia spectacle. We're talking poetry, music, dance, all happening inside these breathtaking sets and costumes designed by the superstar architect of the day, Inigo Jones. But let's be clear, its real purpose was propaganda. These weren't just shows. They were carefully crafted allegories designed to praise King Charles and visualize his divine right to rule. Under Charles, the masque became less about deep philosophical poetry, which his father had actually liked, and all about the visual show. It was a tool, a powerful one, to create a visual realization of the king's absolute power. It was a dazzling, overwhelming argument for his authority that didn't even need words to make its point. So, all of this brings us to the inevitable, dramatic end of this whole cultural moment. As the political crisis finally boiled over, the world of performance art had to face its own final act. The year is 1642. The English Civil War officially kicks off, and one of the first things the new parliamentarian government does is something that had never been done before. They ordered every single public theater in England to be closed. Just like that, the show was over. And you gotta understand, this was way more than just Puritans being killjoys. It was a cold, calculated political move. By shutting down the theaters, Parliament was silencing an entire art form that they saw as hopelessly tied to the monarchy and its culture of, well, aristocratic excess. They were shutting down the king's stage. And the story ends with a final, chilling twist of irony. In 1649, King Charles I was led to his own execution. And the scaffold, the stage for his death, it was built directly outside the banqueting house at Whitehall, the very building Inigo Jones had designed as a magnificent theater to celebrate and glorify his absolute power. The ultimate performance of royal authority became the stage for its utter destruction. Which leaves us with this final thought. The literature of the Caroline Age really shows us that when a society breaks apart, art is never, ever just an escape. Whether it's a soul-searching poem, a lighthearted verse about love, or a massive court spectacle, art always gets dragged into the fight. It becomes a weapon, it becomes a shield, and sometimes it becomes a casualty. It becomes a battlefield.